Hello, this is UKRLIFE with Ludmila Nemyria, and we continue our broadcasting from Kiev, and we are very happy that our guest today is famous Austrian military analyst Tom Cooper. Tom, hello, thank you so much for being with us today.
Hello, nice to be with you. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. Tom, first of all, thank you so much for your help for Ukrainian army. I know that you constantly take care about that. Thank you for that. At the very beginning, I want to tell you, at the beginning of our conversation. And, Tom, there are a lot of talks about the stopping of the war, and you have been analyzing from day one what's going on, the situation on the battlefield, the state of the army, the willing of our allies to help us and their readiness to do this. And if you take all this factor into account from the military point of view, do you think that it's time to stop the war?
Well, time to stop the war. It would certainly do well for Ukraine to, let's say, stop for between 6 and 24 months to reorganize the ZSU and to develop specific capabilities to where they should be. It would be, at least in theory, a lot easier to retrain and re-equip the majority of units than it is currently, because right now you always have at least one battalion from every brigade is in the front line. The other two are resting, recuperating, or training, or retraining, or rebuilding, acquiring new equipment, working up, and so on. Plus, there's this corps organizational structure which is now introduced, so such processes would be easier to do in the case of a ceasefire. However, this would also buy lots of opportunity, or offer lots of opportunity to Russia for reorganizing and rebuilding its own armed forces. So it's a double-edged sword. This is from purely military point of view. What would also happen, one has to keep in mind, the Russians would rebuild their stocks of ballistic missiles, of their cruise missiles, of their attack UAVs. The same would happen, of course, with Ukraine. But right now, the situation is such that Russians can continue attacking with something like 100, perhaps 150 attack UAVs per night or per day, or let's say per 24 hours. Ukraine can, on average, launch something like 50 a day. So perhaps if there would be ceasefire, then Ukraine could build up this capability to manufacture UAVs to something like 100, 200, 300 UAVs per day, deployable per day, and so on and so on. But this is all theory. Matter of fact is that it's foremost Putin who has absolutely no interest to stop this war, because there is absolutely no incentive for him to do so. And therefore, the war is going to go on.
Do you think that there are some reasons, objective reasons, for Russia to stop the war, maybe just even for a year or for 2 years, because of some military reasons?
I don't see any. There are none that I would know about. From Putin's point of view, stopping the war would be the worst possible idea, because, well, let's see his situation from his point of view. He is in control. There is no serious opposition to him in Russia. Nobody is challenging seriously his explanation for the necessity to fight this war. Nobody is opposing him in any kind of serious fashion inside Russia. Outside of Russia, the West is disunited, slow, and rather, well, incompetent than really doing something. The USA are on the best way of actually siding with Putin, crazy against Chinese, while Putin is meanwhile deep in the Chinese pockets. He couldn't survive without Chinese support and cooperation. So if he stops the war, then this all could change to his disadvantage. But as long as the war is going on, he can be sure that it is going to remain the way it is. Therefore, he has no incentive politically and economically to change the situation. And in military sense, well, his recruitment efforts have reached their peak, or actually all-time heights, the last few weeks. Whether they are going to continue growing, I don't know, but the Russian army is recruiting more troops right now, or the last few weeks, than ever since since the start of mobilization, of partial mobilization of September, late September 22. So even from that point of view, he has no reason, no incentive to stop the war. And then in regards of the battlefield situation, well, this might not be the best from the Russian point of view, but it's good enough. Russia is exercising pressure upon Ukraine, and Ukraine is lacking the means even to properly defend itself, not to talk about counterattacking and recovering some territory, for example, encircling and capturing a larger part of the Russian armed forces, or achieving any kind of a significant success. There are minor successes, lots of minor successes, no doubt about this. But in grand total, this is not special, and therefore Russia is still in advantage. Then we see the situation in regards of Ukrainian air defenses, where the stocks of air defense missiles are lower than ever before. They were critical already about 1 year ago, after the 6-month US stop of deliveries, but now they are even worse than back then. So why should Putin stop? He has absolutely no reason.
Do you think that Russia try to prepare for big offensive, summer offensive, or autumn offensive, or spring-autumn offensive? And what is possible? And what is possible as a result of such offensive?
One define it big offensive. Do you mean that they are deploying 50,000 troops and then supported by 500 tanks and something of that kind with 5,000 artillery pieces and whatever? No, they cannot do that, because the entire Russian army does not have that many tanks and armored personal vehicles and infantry fighting vehicles and artillery pieces intact anymore. This Russian army, this huge mechanized juggernaut that used to exist as of 2022, even as of 2023, is non-existent anymore. And what's worse, its capability to exercise this large-scale operations and to run, to for example, neutralize a specific selected sector of the Ukrainian front line, punch through, drive into deeper behind the front line. This is non-existent anymore. This is why I find, by the way, all of this talk about Putin is going to invade NATO or Baltic states or whatever for silly, because Russia simply does not have this capability anymore. They do not even have the skills anymore under current circumstances on the battlefield in Ukraine. You see what they do. They what was that? A few days ago, they have sent 40-something armored infantry vehicles and tanks with this do-it-yourself armor on them, these turtles and so on. And they really try to smash, that was the position sort of the 14th Brigade of the National Guard of Ukraine. They really gave it a serious try. And what was the result? Almost 30 vehicles were destroyed, plus 30-something motorcycles, plus 200 troops killed, and so on and so on. They achieved absolutely nothing. So this is simply a beautiful and apostrophes illustration for the status and condition of the Russian army right now. They can't do anything better. And even if they would try, let's say they now stop their offensive operations, which they can't, because the Russian military doctrine has no concept of stopping and doing nothing, but it is constantly attacking. Even when defending, it's counter-attacking all the time. Because
really, Russian doctrine, military doctrines,
yes.
always constantly attack?
Yes, I mean, this is traditional Soviet military doctrine since late 30s or something like that. Even when they are defending, when the enemy is attacking them, they are counter-attacking with the aim of creating a situation from which they can run their own offense, counter-offensive or offensive, however you want to call it. So, therefore, they have no right now. Right, they have no other means, so to say, to run such big offensives or drive through Belarus again or do something else that will be meaningful. I do not see this. Of course, there is still quite a sizable reserve, strategic reserve of VDV and Spetsnaz forces. They are always there. They have suffered heavy casualties in Kursk the last winter, but they are in the process of being rebuilt. And the longer it goes on, so when we're talking about May, June, by June they are going to be rebuilt in terms of number of troops again, because we have seen how many losses they have suffered in Kursk in what was that October, November, December in their counterattacks and so on. So this was some of the VDV divisions were badly depleted, even mauled and so on. No doubt about this. But they have meanwhile were given 3 months and probably more to rebuild, and they are going to do so. This is not a problem for them to rebuild their personal strength, but they do not have the vehicles to replace what they have lost in Kursk over the last 6 months. So this strategic reserve, besides this strategic reserve, it is there as an intervention force. It is a last-ditch reserve for Putin in the case something goes wrong along the front lines. So he can't simply order them, okay, now deploy the VDV and Spetsnaz and let's march to Kiev again. It's not going to happen. Even if it would happen, they wouldn't get very much further than their units are constantly doing every single day. We have seen, and was that about 10, 15 days ago, there was a local attack in Toretsk, from Toretsk in northwestern direction, and an assault group went some 6 kilometers deep behind the Ukrainian lines, but was completely smashed in the process. So this is kind of the biggest Russian tactical success since Ukrainian withdrawal from Kursk. So the capability is not there anymore in Russia. The skills are not there, not available anymore. They do not even train their officers. The replacement officers that are leading their units are not even trained to run mechanized warfare, maneuvering warfare anymore, the way they used to train, at least a bit. Nowadays, they're training these grinding assaults in form of assault groups, de facto a modification of Wagner tactics from 22-23. And, well, this is all meant for the next 5 to 10 kilometers, not any further, because they know by the time one of their assault waves or assault groups reaches 5 and then 10 kilometers, whether to the front line or into the Ukrainian lines or behind the Ukrainian lines, is going to be destroyed. There are going to be 5 to 20 troops left of it, and that's it. So they're not even trying to teach their officers and their troops how to operate any further behind that point, because they know they have to bring another. Ukrainians are going to create a new front line very quickly. If nothing else, Sirski is going to patch up the front line with another battalion brought in from 200 kilometers away. But he's going to patch up the front line, and then the Russians will have to launch their entire breaching attempt anew. So it is always this 5 to 10 kilometers. Most of the times they're not getting that far at all. They're getting 500, perhaps 1,000 meters at most. But in planning, when they're discussing it, it's 5 to 10 kilometers.
Tom, if you look for the battlefield, found that Russia activated on Kharkiv direction, Sumy direction, and at the same time, we know that Ukraine holding a bridgehead in the Kursk region, and as Ukrainian president had said, Ukrainian troops have advanced in Belgorod region. It's like a different type of war, or what does it mean? Is it military? Do you have military argument for such situation when, for example, Russia forward in Donbass, for example, and Ukraine forward in some Russian region? What is the type of war? This is about type of war or about political purposes?
This is political operation, politically motivated operations. So kind of oh, look, we have a bridgehead of 2,000 meters into Russia in Kursk. We are still holding it. And then we have another bridgehead into Belgorod Oblast as well. So we are holding there a bridgehead of, what was that, 3 or 4 kilometers width and 1.5 to 2 kilometers deep. And that's it. It is for propaganda purposes, because this is important whether to Zelensky or to Yermak to be able to claim, oh, we are holding Russian terrain under control. As one can see, nobody in the West is impressed by this. The least of all Trump. Absolutely useless for him. He's not even interested. He's not interested in anti-Ukraine. So why should he be interested in some minor bridgehead on the Russian side of the border? So, and in military sense, this is just gulping huge volume of resources, of troops, of ammunition, of equipment, which would be better used somewhere else. But again, there is a Ukrainian president, and there is his presidential advisor, and there is his general of fantastic news, and they are all just worried about great news. And this is the same kind of politics we see all the time. We see this in the West, we see this in Putin, we see this in Assad, we see this in Iran, we see this in Venezuela, everywhere. Everything is great, everything is fantastic, everything is super, it's going to get even better, and grandiose announcements, and we are going to impose tariffs, and everybody's going to pay tariffs, and it is going to flush us full with money, and whatever else. This is Trump in the United States. And don't worry, we are well prepared, and we are going to meet and talk, and then we are going to meet and talk even more. This is in Europe. Big announcements, lots of bubbling, no action at all eventually, no solutions for any kind of problems, working into the pockets of the super rich, at the cost of environment and the future of the entire humanity. Nobody cares, nobody does something to change this. Zelensky is keeping himself in power, or Yermak, or whoever is there and really in charge. This is how the governance in Ukraine is working. And there is, of course, the emergency law is in force, which means that the capabilities of the parliament to counter the president and to force him into into specific decisions are minimal. Power sharing is non-existent. He's not interested in getting the opposition involved on his side. He's not even interested in getting his own political party entirely to his side. So, and this is what then results with at most semi-solutions in most of cases. You could say politics is always a matter of compromise and semi-solutions, but in this case it's even less than semi-solutions. It's just lots of bubbling announcements and so on, but no action at all. And then always running after the car, like a dog after the car, barking after the car. Where is the problem? Ukrainians are fed up of such a politics, and there are enough people in Ukraine who are acting on their own, mostly younger businessmen. And they say, okay, the government is not going to ready to finance this project, that project, or that project, but we need this project and that project and that project. We need robotics, we need AE, we need UAVs, we need different other solutions, for example, this electronic warfare system. So what happens then? They say, okay, listen, if I now go to the Ministry of Defense, they're going to say no, or niet. But if I go to local brigade commander, he is going to say yes, please. So they go to the local brigade commander, he says yes, please. They arrange somehow the financing of the project, and all of a sudden there is a highly effective weapon in operations by a specific brigade. Because there is so much, the funding is so poor, so there's so little money, it takes very long for this weapon system to enter serious production. And then you have a situation where it takes 6, 12, 18 months for a specific weapon system to become really interesting in terms of numbers and effectiveness in grand total. Then only does the Zelensky government react and said, oh, no, this is us. This was us. This was our idea. We have financed this. This is all. We have done this. And then what happens next? Then he announces, no, this year the Ukrainian government or Ukraine is going to manufacture 1.5 million of UAVs. I listen to such an announcement, take my pen, calculate, I'm coming out with something like 500,000, at most that was actually for the last year, 500,000 UAVs manufactured. And out of this 500,000 manufactured, less than 200,000 were financed by the government. This is speaking clear language about the situation. You don't need anything else. You know what is going on. Which means that actually the by all the success of this growth of arms industry or rebuilding of the arms industry in Ukraine, because Ukraine used to have a huge arms industry. It was actually arming the entire Soviet Union plus 50 allies 50 years ago. But by all this success and rebuilding of the Ukrainian arms industry, and by the fact that it's really nowadays manufacturing 30 to 40% of weaponry and ammunition the Ukrainian armed forces are using every day, actually less than 50% of these 30 to 40% are really covered or paid by the government. The rest is all private initiative, whether private initiative of Ukrainians or Ukrainians in cooperation with foreigners or whatever other combinations are coming to your mind. So this means the government keeps on insistently, I said, like a dog barking, you know how it happens, after the car and running after the car. This is the Ukrainian government. What is it doing in terms of rearmament process of the Ukrainian armed forces? And unless this changes fundamentally, it's not going to get better, sadly.
In that case, let's continue to speak about the weapons, because if we look for Russia, we see how Russia increased their military industry, arms industry. We see how Iran and North Korea and even China, maybe sometimes, help with weapons, with missiles and other parts for production of weapons. If you look for Ukraine, what we have Ukraine, and now we don't understand what will happen with the help from the USA, because the United States has not budgeted for aid to Ukraine, and we don't know how Europe can compensate this lack of American military aid. And in that case, it seems that Ukraine is in very complicated situation with weapons now and in nearest future, maybe middle future. And in that case, we speak about possible activation of Russia on the battlefields. What do you think? How it look like from your points of view, and what can be done in that case?
Okay, let me, for the start of answering this question, define a few things from my point of view. How do I see them, and what is my information? In regards of Ukraine and US aid, forget it. Forget US aid. You're not going to get it anytime soon. So you have to work on your own. Okay, now you have lost, so to say, US support. Then let's go for EU support or European NATO support. You are not going to get a lot. You have seen the last more than 3 years. You're going to get only fulcrums, peanuts and so on. Perhaps a little bit more in regards of ammunition, artillery ammunition. Okay, this is going to remain at the same level, at least officially. So where it works in this regard is this private initiative by Ukrainian and Western enterprises, where they are working together, bypassing the Ukrainian government, bypassing official places in the West, bypassing even Western governments, because even these are incompetent and corrupt and slow and so on, and bureaucratic without an end. So where it works is this private initiative. This is working well, and this is going to continue increasing. But you cannot expect this to become really effective, because too little money is invested in this fashion. So it takes time for this to become effective. Every single project takes time to become effective and to really work up. So in this regards, you cannot expect any kind of major appearances or changes on the battlefield before 27 or 28. It's as simple as that. In regards of Russia and their industrial production, I'm skeptical in this regards, and that's for multiple reasons. Firstly, there is no Russian high-tech industry. Of what is there of Russian high-tech industry? I mean, high technology in terms of electronics, avionics, missile components, and so on. You have two types of this industry in Russia. You have industry which is still manufacturing weaponry, arms, weapon systems from 30, 40 years ago, from late 80s and early 90s, which is still containing the same components for all of these times, for 30, 40 years. And they are still manufacturing such weapons. This is primarily surface-to-air missiles and artillery rocket systems like BM-21, BM-27, BM-30. So this is working well. And nowadays you can also see that the artillery is slowly disappearing because it is destroyed, and they cannot rebuild their artillery. They cannot manufacture a similar number of tubes of new artillery pieces. So they are replacing artillery by rocket artillery. And they are replacing artillery by UAVs, especially FPVs. So now, in this regards, of course, they are on advantage. Why? Because they have cooperation with China, and while China has imposed export sanctions upon Ukraine, it has imposed none upon Russia, which means that parts which so far were always bought from China on a free market by Ukrainians are not available to Ukraine anymore, but they are available to Russia. And this is also a low profile or small footprint sort of business for the Chinese. They can always say, oh, no, we are not supplying anything of this. We have sold this to Kazakhstan or to India or to Zimbabwe or wherever. And how did it end in Russia? Oh, sorry, we don't know. We have no idea. We can't do anything about this. This is so terrible. We are really disgusted about this and very, very sorry. Also, we have earned a few billions with this, but who cares? So this is how the Chinese cooperation is actually functioning. In regards of Iran, I don't know why people talking about Iranian arms shipments to Russia, because they are actually known from time to time. But I mean, if you complain that Iran is supplying ammunition or whatever to Russia, it's also supplying it to Ukraine. If you check with your units, you're going to find plenty of mortar bombs made in Iran, for example, or artillery shells made in Iran. Why? Because these were captured while smuggled from Iran to the Houthis in Yemen. And all of these weapons caches that were captured were then rerouted to Ukraine. So, and there was more of this than what Iran has delivered directly to Russia. Russian relations between Russia and Iran are very complex. It would take probably a separate interview just to explain you the basics of it. But bottom line is, Russians are not delivering to Iran what Iranians want to have, and therefore Iranians are not delivering anything at all to Russia. That's it. As simple as that. And explaining then that now how Iranian ballistic missiles, where are these Iranian ballistic missiles? Even if this would be artillery rockets, not ballistic missiles. Firstly, and secondly, Iranians need them more than the Russians need their Iranian ballistic missiles. And we have seen now in the case of Russian acquisition of North Korean ballistic missiles, it took them almost a year to get ballistic missiles from North Korea, then to train their crews on them, to use them, then to find out how much are these missing, because they were missing by at least 200 meters on average, which means that usually it was 500 meters, but okay. And then to rebuild the entire stock to improve their precision. So if they would now go for Iranian missiles, they would have to undergo a similar process, minus improving the precision, because Iranian missiles are already more precise than the Russian missiles, as we have seen during Iranian missile attacks on Israel last year. So Russians would be perhaps happy to get such missiles, but they're not going to get them because Iranians need them, firstly, at home because of Israel, and secondly, if Iranians start delivering such missiles to Russia, they know Russians are going to start copying their own missiles. And then the Russians are never going to buy anything from them again, firstly. And secondly, they are never going to deliver their Russian advanced weaponry like Su-35s to Iran. It's as simple as that. So then we have North Korea. North Korea is ruled by a dictator, that is true, but the guy is actually quite clever. And so he's delivering only specific sorts of aid. He's taking care not to weaken his own army at home, because he needs it for his own security, but also because of his perceived security vis-a-vis South Korea and the United States. Firstly, secondly, he's delivering systems with which he's making Russia depending on him, like Coxswain guns. Okay, a gun of 170 millimeter caliber. Nobody is making such artillery ammunition, but North Korea, which means if Russians do something he dislikes, he instantly stops delivering ammunition, and the Russians can go and do whatever they want with North Korean guns. It's similar with troops. Okay, he has sent some troops to Russia because there were Ukrainian troops on the Russian soil, and these troops are so far fought only on the Russian, officially internationally recognized Russian territory, not inside Ukraine. So you have also very simple rules for who deployed where and who is doing what. Actually, it's never too much in order not to risk harsher sanctions from the West. Especially this is Chinese interest. This is a little bit of North Korean interest as well. But Iranians simply undoing what the West is blaming them to be doing, because they have a major problem with the Russians. So this is all, So when you ask me then, how is that going to continue, and how is the Russian industry going to continue? Russians are going to continue using foremost China for import of high tech. This is where this is working. And I said this is a low profile affair. That means Chinese can deliver to them almost everything the Russians need. Of course, the Russians pay 5, 10, 20% more than they would usually pay, but that's it. But foremost, in this fashion, China is not causing itself any kind of troubles with Western Europe. On the contrary, right now, China is even trying to position itself as a friend of the West, and we are not doing to you what the Americans are doing to you. Yeah, this Trump is an awful guy, but we are good Chinese, we are friendly. Just buy, please, another shipload of our cheap stuff and destroy your own industry by buying it. Thank you very much. That's how it works.
Tom, if we look for United States and working on their military complex, it was a very important and interesting situation with the stopping of help from USA, immediately stopping when Trump stopped the military supplies and he stopped intelligence information, about that. Mm-hmm. And America even stopped some engineering blocks in F-16s. Many people speak about that. And after that story, we saw that Germany and even some Baltic countries disagreed to buy some F-35 because of dangers that America could influence or could manage these plans by distantly. Yes, and that is why, what do you think? If America stop to help for Ukraine, how it could influence for the war in general? Because, for example, we know that America could influence for F-16, for Patriot, for other different help, because we have some part of weapons from America, for example, and we need to have agreement from USA to use this. How, in principle, if America go and we need to forget about the America help, as you say, how you say, what we need to do?
Well, from my point of view, the way I perceive this situation is that it is perfect. It couldn't get better.
Why? You think so?
Why? Because it's forcing both Ukrainians and Europeans, or actually Europeans, including Ukraine, to become self-sufficient. If you check the, let me now give you an unrelated or similar example. Iran in 1978, 79, there was a revolution, and the Shah was toppled, and a new government came into power. And this government was at odds with the United States, the Great Satan. Yeah. Okay, so now the government disarmed the armed forces, almost like Ukrainian armed forces were disarmed over the last 20 years. And then all of a sudden, Iraq invaded Iran. And now there was a trouble. The Iranians now had to recall all of their officers they have fired. They have disarmed over 200,000 other ranks, so lower ranking troops. So they had to bring these people back into service. Then they had to retrain these people, to bring their equipment back into operational condition, because it was standing around for 2 years and nobody was using it, nobody was maintaining it. And what happened? Eventually, Iran rebuilt its arms industry, rebuilt its armed forces, and so on and so on. And actually, by 1982, Iran has defeated the Iraqi invasion and liberated something like 80% of what Iraq has captured in the first 2 months of the war. So, de facto, without the mullahs and hawks in Tehran deciding to export their revolution to Iraq and conquer Najaf and Karbala and Baghdad and Basra and so on, of course. But Najaf and Karbala are important because they are religious sites. Actually, without these hawks prolonging the war, Iran was victorious as of summer 1982 in this conflict. Why? Because it was forced into self-sufficiency. It was abandoned by the United States, or split from the United States, and it had to work on its own. And it was so very isolated from the rest of the world, that it had to do everything on its own. And that was what worked. And I think that the same would be excellent for Ukraine and for Europe, or for Europe, including Ukraine again, in terms of forcing Europeans, including Ukrainians, to act on their own. So far, we had 3 years of Europeans. Oh, yes, we are supporting Ukraine very much, the Americans come and do something. We are going to finance a little bit, and that is all very nice, but we don't want to get too much involved into all of this. And besides, why should we, we have more important things to do, and our defense sector is not so very much important. We are earning money by selling stuff to the Chinese. So, and this is primarily cars and TV sets and whatever else. No, we don't want to get this too much. And besides, we don't want to ruin our relations to Putin, because we are getting cheap gas. We are still buying lots of cheap gas from Russia. Are we super clever in Europe? So that was the system, how it worked the last 3 years. Now, when you have a situation where the United States openly say Ukraine is not of our interest, and if you want to fight the Russians, then do so on your own with European support. Okay, fine, but it is not our problem. Let's go somewhere else. Now they are all forced into action. Arguably, it's still, we are now in April, and so it's already since late January. There's 3 months that the Europeans are just babbling, and not doing really much. It appears that most of all of these giant presidents and other politicians are waiting for the new German government to be in office and to take over and to then announce its own position, and actually to clarify its own position and start taking steps. But essentially, there is still nothing seriously happening in regards of European aid for Ukraine. Of course, the disappearance of the end of the US military aid is going to be make things very complex for Ukraine. It's also going to cause additional losses, especially in terrain. But on the other hand, it's going to force Ukraine, I hope so at least, Ukrainian government to order a bigger reform of the armed forces, because these armed forces are presently, most of them are still Soviet style. That means there are lots of troops. They are still, in comparison to their weaponry and firepower, while you actually need very few troops with lots of firepower, which you can do only if you intensify, but really massively intensify, working with robotics and other high technologies. So this is what you need: robotics, high technologies, UAVs, blah, 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 electronic warfare, and so on. and your government is still too slow to work in these regards. You have excellent experts representing your weapons industry, explaining it to the West, and the West understands this better than your own government. So what should I tell you? This is what is necessary. It is therefore my assessment is the best that could happen is for the United States ready to cut off its support for Ukraine, and thus forcing Europeans and Ukrainians, including Ukrainians, to act on their own, in our own interest.
Tom, you say about that we need a lot of firepower and we need to be self-sufficient. Yes, I agree with that. But do you think that now European military complex is ready to work with Ukrainian military complex? Because it is quite important.
No, of course, it is crucial. And no, it is not ready. We have successfully killed, or actually, with US support over the last 70 years, we have successfully killed here in Europe our defense sector. After the Second World War, when it was important to start ordering new tanks, new aircraft, new ships from our own industry, the Americans came over and said, listen, we have so many ships, we have so many aircraft, we have so many tanks left over from the Second World War. Here you have them, all of them, dozens of thousands of them, take them, we are giving them off for free. And this is how European armies were rebuilt in the 1940s, 1950s. And then after that, there was of course, requirement to make a new version or to develop a new generation of weaponry and so on. But the Americans always came with their subsidized new projects, like F-16s or whatever. And you had a situation where the American projects, everybody continued buying American. If nothing else, then like in the case of F-16s, the Americans also made the offer, listen, if you buy F-16s, or before F-16s it was F-104 Starfighter, you get also our nuclear bombs. So this is this UK arrangement, this is what it's called. It means that members of NATO air forces operating US aircraft have the right or the privilege, as whichever way you want to call it, to, in the case of necessity, call the Americans and say, listen, we want to nuke. Back then, during the Cold War, it was Dresden or Berlin or whatever. You have 20 nuclear weapons on your air base, on my soil. Therefore, I'm now going there, taking 2 of these bombs, mounting them on my F-16s or F-104s, and I'm bombing Berlin and Dresden with nuclear weapons. This was, from the European point of view, this was fantastic arrangement. Everything was fine. This is why Europe also became too complacent. It didn't do anything at all once Putin has invaded Ukraine in 2014 and then 3 years ago again. And that's why I say now, enough of this. If you continue like that, this is leading nowhere. We are going to have this Ukraine war, under apostrophes, this Ukraine war, for the next 30 years as long as well, at least as long as Putin is alive. The best idea, best solution is really what Trump is currently doing. He's playing actually straight into European hands, including Ukraine, and which is opening the way for our own self-sufficiency, making us independent from American products in all possible segments, but especially in defense. We need this in Europe. Of course, this is extending the war in Ukraine, because even if you want to ramp up our production of heavy weaponry, for example, this is not going to work. And it is not going to work not because there would be no money or there would be no industrial facilities, but because we don't have the working force which would be qualified, trained to construct that new industry and then to work in that industry. Which means we need people, machinists, technicians, and so on, who can work in such industry, but we don't have them because our schooling systems are not producing such people already for 20, 30 years. If we need people with technical education, we call Philippines or somebody in Africa or wherever, import 2,000 people, give them working permits and visas, and they are working here. Or for example, there was that I think in Croatia that they used to have huge shipyards taken over from the or left over from Yugoslav times, but nobody in Croatia wants to work on such a shipyard. So they started importing workers. Even before joining the EU, there were Bulgarians, Romanians, and then whoever else, ever further east, so to say, from Asia, who came to Croatia to work on such shipyards. Because nobody from Croatia wanted to work on such a shipyard. And you have a similar situation nowadays, which is why it's silly when somebody is complaining, oh, these illegal immigrants are taking away jobs. They are taking away jobs which nobody wants to do. Because you don't have Austrians who wants to go to the field and harvest with hands. For example, strawberries. Nobody wants to collect strawberries from the field here in Austria. Nobody wants even to go to working in the hospital and taking care about people who are in need. We constantly have to import medical personnel from abroad, whether from the Philippines or from Lebanon or from Ukraine, from anywhere, just not from Austria. So, again, self-sufficiency is an anti-system. You need schooling, reform of schooling. You need to reinforce the education in technical disciplines. You need immediate investment into factories, for them to resize production, to educate or to school their own, or to train their own personnel, and so on and so on. And this is just a start. And then you go up to the armed forces, where nowadays it's even hard, even if, for example, the Germans or Austrians who now decide, okay, stop with professional armed forces, let's introduce national service. It wouldn't work because 50% of potential recruits are obsessed. Sorry. They're with other words. So they can't serve. They can't go to the armed forces and serve in the infantry, or they wouldn't fit into a tank. And so you have really systematic problems. And all of this, or at least a big portion of this, could be served to sound management and self-sufficiency. But we don't have decision makers who are speaking a clear language and saying, okay, we need this, we have to do it, and so on. Now they're let's go and talk with Trump, and let's go to talk and with Xi. And no, actually, the situation is simple. If Europe, including Ukraine, does not take care of itself, well, then somebody else is going to do that, but on its own behalf, not on European behalf. It's as simple as that.
Tom, if you say about the decision of this systematic problem you speak about, does it mean that the nearest years will be the years of arms race? I mean that military budget will be increased dramatically in USA.
There's no other way.
See that it's happened. Yes. Do you think it's reality of nearest future? Do you expect that we will see new wars in that case? Or what will happen if we speak about the, as you say, systematic problem?
No, there is already an arms race. There is already an arms race already now. Yes, and this is not. I mean, to be sincere, if you're look, I'm into military history, and from my point of view, there is a continuous arms race ever since some predecessor of Homo sapiens took some kind of branch or a bone into his hand and hit somebody else on his head. So, there is an arms race ever since. This arms race is now intensified simply because Europeans have figured out something like 10 or 20% of what they should figure out, that they need to the capability to defend themselves without the Americans. So there is investment into factories, there is investment into increased productions, and some factories are finally, after 3 years, working 3 shifts and so on and so on. Okay, so this is so far okay, but this rearmament doesn't mean that there are automatically going to be new wars. On the contrary, stronger armament means also deterrent, which means less war. So, and one of the reasons why Putin does not dare attacking countries like Finland or Baltic republics or even Moldova is that they are already members of NATO, which means that deterrence is working. Even deterrence at the level of 2022, which was absolutely minimal, because in 2022, entire NATO was closing its doors, or offices actually, at Friday, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, going home, and that's war. That was it. And please, Russians, don't invade us before Monday at 9 o'clock in the morning, because we're not here. It was simply that way. So deterrence is, but deterrence was still working, okay? And he didn't invade Baltic republics or somebody else. He invaded Ukraine instead. So this does not mean automatically that there are going to be more wars. On the contrary.
Tom, and the last question. Now Ukraine is a very special situation. For example, some years ago, we discussed that we need tanks, or we need planes, or we need something else. And we expected, and we was very happy when we received this F-16 or Abrams or and other Leopards and other things. But now we are in absolutely another situation. It means, for example, for me, it looks like if we not stop the war in a month, for example, like Trump promised or suggested, we will continue this war.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that this war will be absolutely another war, in absolutely another condition. I mean, without American support, as we discussed earlier, with small support from European Union, or not constantly support from European Union because of different reasons. And it will be absolutely another situation for Ukraine. And what do you think? How it's look like? What is your experience? What you expected from?
Well, you can expect a similar situation like early last year, when there were these months of when Biden stopped, or U.S. Congress stopped the supplies of U.S. aid to Ukraine for something like 7 months, which means that you're lacking ammunition for effective defense, and then gradually losing terrain. Avdiivka fell back then, and then there was this Russian breakthrough at Ocheretine in direction of Pokrovsk. Sorry, my Ukrainian is still poor in regards of geography. So you can expect the same to happen now again, which means the Russians are probably going to push over the borders of Donetsk and Luhansk and try to get further west. This is what's going to happen, which means that lots of Ukrainians are going to get killed again, especially if Syrskyi remains in command, because he's incompetent as commander. No matter how much he thinks about himself, what kind of a genius in defense he is. You don't like to hear this, I guess, but this is another topic, and so on and so on. So, but you have meanwhile Drapati, who has proven himself the last few months as a very skilled commander and has stabilized the situation in Pokrovsk, and I hope he's going to stabilize it further south as well in the coming weeks. Anyway, again, Ukraine is going to go to particularly bad 6 to 12 months. No dispute about this. This is going to happen anyway, because at some point in time, U.S. aid, what Biden has promised to deliver, and the U.S. Congress has promised to deliver while Biden was still a president, this is going to run out. This is going to happen sooner rather than later. Perhaps the deliveries have already stopped. We are going to hear this in the next few weeks. So this is going to happen anyway. This is unavoidable. And this is bad for Ukraine for the first few months, but later you're going to learn to rely on yourself and to self-sufficiency and through cooperation, as said, to all I explained earlier, to this private level cooperation with enterprises and businesses in Europe. You're going to recover your capability and get back, into the game. So we have to expect a very bad summer, probably very bad autumn, perhaps even very bad winter, 25, 26, and then we are going to see sometimes, towards the end of this year and early next year, a slow recovery of capabilities. The worst that could happen right now would be for your president or his general fantastic news to come to the idea to run another offensive operation like last year into Kursk, and then squander, lots of equipment and troops and supplies for nothing, for no achievement at all. So I hope this is not going to happen. It is a good year for Ukrainian armed forces to reform, to reorganize, and to retrain their troops, to learn to fight in an entirely new way, using robots, using UAVs, new modern UAVs, advanced UAVs, which are increasingly depending on AI, on artificial intelligence. So this is what matters right now. Then development of electronic warfare systems. You have this, what is the name, LIVA, which is this electronic weapon system of Ukrainian design, which has destroyed de facto the Russian glide bombs. You don't hear a lot anymore about CABs or UMPKs. Why not? Because they're missing all the time. Why are they missing? Because of the LIVA electronic warfare system. And they're missing, I can tell you, I've heard from Ukrainian troops who are there, they do not care anymore about UMPKs. Why? Because these are falling 600 meters away. Not on their position anymore, not 100 meters next to that position, but 500 or 600 meters away. In some cases, it's even more. It's 10 or 15 kilometers. So you have a situation where they are not threat anymore. It means the Russians come in, drop their bombs fall somewhere, who knows where, but not where they intended them to, what they intended to hit. That is the point. So again, you're going to have a very bad situation for several months and so on, until the system which was created to this private entrepreneurship adapts itself, adjusts itself until new ideas and new solutions are born, developed and materialize, and then you have a new process, a new war, developing and going on. The problem, where I see the problem, is the politics. I said that your government is all the time running after the developments. European governments are running after developments. European governments should have massively increased their arms production 3 years ago. They didn't. They're doing that only now. So let's hope that this experience with Trump now is going to force them finally to do so now. Because the last 2 months have done this only partially. Something like 20% increase of arms production is there. But in grand total, it's still not enough. In grand total, they're still buying only enough armament and weaponry and ammunition to rebuild their own armed forces by 2030, which is in 5 years from now. But not enough to rebuild their armed forces and to enable Ukraine to win the war. There are these two tasks at the same time which have to be covered by the industry in Europe. Rebuild own armed forces, but also help Ukraine win the war against Russia. Right now, what we are getting in Europe, or what we are manufacturing in Europe, is only enough for one part of this task, which is rebuild armed forces, but by 2030, in 5 years, not now. So, again, this is why I say there is hardly anything that would be better to happen to Ukraine or to Europe, including Ukraine. I have to learn this really properly, finally, is for the USA to stop military aid for Ukraine, thus forcing Europe, including Ukraine, into self-sufficiency, and that instantly, because then there is no other solution but to promptly, instantly, immediately increase arms production and to deliver to Ukraine whatever Europe can only deliver.
Tom, thank you so much.
I know this is not promising. This is not something you might like to hear, and something else. This is not very funny or enthusing or whatever, promising, but it is the only way forward. It is something that should have happened already 3 years ago. It is happening only now, sadly, but it is the only way forward, and it is the most promising way forward, because nobody, really nobody, no London, no Paris, no Berlin, no Rome, nobody can help Ukraine as much as Ukraine can help itself. We have so many clever people. We have so many skills and capabilities. There are sectors in which Ukraine is already further, but really miles in front of everybody else, like electronic warfare, like UAVs, and so on. You can do this so much better. This combat experience that you have, that your warriors have, is entirely different magnitude than whatever NATO thinks it has got, or the Americans think they have got, on whoever, or the Russians think they have got. You just need people who know how to use this in commercial sense. And this is where it's so important. These private entrepreneurs, which are working on their own initiative and cooperating also with Western enterprises, and where the things are already moving. It just takes time, I said, for the politics to react to this. This is the sad point about all of this. Sorry, I completed now.
Tom, thank you so much. Thank you.
You're most welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much to be with us today. Thank you. Tom Cooper was our guest today, and we are very happy that he found time for us. Thank you so much, and stay with us.